let's try to understand what we mean by a native speaker construct under basic language cognition and higher language cognition theory. Native speaker is the one who acquires the language as a young child and maintains that language into the adulthood. In linguistic terms, a native speaker is someone who has acquired basic language cognition, which I have already explained that is common among all the native speakers, and who may have acquired some or many features of higher language cognition as well, that is attained through interaction or encounter with the people around him or her. Native speakers differ substantially in HLC as a function of individual attributes such as age, intelligence, knowledge of the world, level of education, professional career, and leisure time activities. So these factors can play an important role in creating the differences among the native speakers as far as the HLC is concerned. The acquisition process itself, the development of language proficiency for first language learner and second language learner, is gradual, and this is true for both the acquisition of BLC and the acquisition of HLC. So we see that when we are talking about the development of language proficiency, this process itself is very complicated, itself is a very highly complex for the first language learner as well as the second language learner. And therefore, we see this happening gradual in both BLC as well as HLC. The important issue in second language acquisition and bilingualism is concerned with age question. It is an empirical matter to ascertain at which age, for example, how long or shortly before adulthood BLC is required. So the very important question is the age factor, that at which age it starts or when it stops before you acquire BLC, basic language cognition. Now, this is something which is an empirical matter and needs to be assessed or tested based on the empirical study. Differences between societies and how they affect the contents of basic language cognition of the languages acquired by first language learners in these societies is also an empirical matter. So the differences between the societies and those differences can contribute in the matter of or in the acquisition of basic language cognition. So again, this is a question that what type of differences can actually affect this BLC, and this can also be tested or acquired through empirical study. Hallstein proposed the following corollaries. First, he named them his hypotheses, but later on, due to criticism from other researchers that they are simply the extended definitions of his term, he named them as corollaries, as something that emerged from the outcomes of his studies. The first corollary says, all adult first language learners not suffering from cognitive impairment, regardless of differences in age and intellectual functioning, are able to comprehend and produce both correctly and quickly isolated utterances consisting of high-frequency lexical phrase and high-frequency morphosyntactic structures. So, all adult first language learners, if they are not suffering from any mental impairment, regardless of their age and intellectual functioning, they can comprehend and produce isolated utterances of high-frequency lexical phrases and high-frequency morphosyntactic structure. That is basically the morphosyntactic structure is the word and how they are placed in sentences, and lexical phrases are based on the different high-frequency used words. Second says, individual differences among adult first language learners will be relatively large in tasks involving higher language cognition discourse in all four modes of languages using reading, writing, listening and speaking. So what we see that the individual differences among the adults of first language learner will be relatively large in tasks which involves higher language cognition discourse with regard to reading, writing, listening and speaking, but all adult first language learner will perform at ceiling, which is highly impressive performance. In BLC tasks, conceptually simple oral tasks, listening and speaking involving high frequent linguistic units. So here we see the simple oral task consists of these two modes. There you see their performance at ceiling, their performance at a very higher stage. Third says continued language use modulates the decline in processing speed in old age, while the continued use of written language is modulated by level of education, type of occupation and interest. Although speed with which humans can process information increase over time until it reaches a peak around age 22, from the age of 27 on gradually it decreases. So basically what happens is that when you are moving towards old age, they decreases. The vast majority of old people remain capable of processing linguistic information fast enough to allow for relatively unimpaired functional language use, provided they can continue to practice their language skills on daily basis and do not suffer from any mental impairment. Fourth says every bilingual can attain native speaker proficiency in more than one language as long as they minimally acquire basic language cognition. So that means that all bilinguals or early bilinguals but in their early stage can attain native speaker unless and until if they have minimal acquisition of basic language cognition in each language. Fifth says basic language cognition, while being attainable by late second language learners in the domains of vocabulary and many or even most grammatical structures, will generally not be attainable in the domain of pronunciation. So this area, pronunciation, will remain a challenging area or a questionable area in terms of the attainability of the correct pronunciation, although others part or other linguistic element can be attained by late second language learners. The sixth corollary says late second language learner can become as proficient in higher language cognition as first language learners of the same intellectual, educational, professional and cultural profile despite some deficiencies in their second language, basic language cognition. So they can have it here in the higher language, although they have the deficiency in the basic language cognition. Seventh is the likelihood of a person to acquire basic language cognition in two or more languages is determined by the age of the onset and the amount of exposure and the productive language use. To conclude, in the words of Holstein, BLC HLC theory and its accompanying corollaries do not constitute a theory of language acquisition. They constitute a theory of language proficiency, primarily proposed as an instrument to help solve the big issues concerning language acquisition and bilingualism.